Hey guys, welcome back. So, we're going to continue our journey into setting up our authentication for our API, and we'll be setting up this endpoint for user one registration and two login and, well, by extension, authentication. Now, I've already kind of cheated and gone ahead and set up the new controller. So you can pause and go ahead and get up to speed. Right click controllers, go ahead, create a brand new controller that's blank and call it account controller. And I already went ahead and kind of started doing my injections. So, two you're familiar with, two you would be seeing for the very first time. So you already know the logger and the mapper, so I don't need to explain those in any great detail. However, you would be seeing user manager and sign in manager potentially for the first time. These are two built-in libraries courtesy of Identity Core. So when you type them, you may want to include the missing reference and you'll see those start to appear up top. Now notice the context for the user manager and for the sign-in manager is API user or whatever the custom user class is that you would have used when you were setting up identity. If you didn't use one, then you continue to use identity user. So whatever class it is that you set as your context in your configuration, and the configuration would be here. Whatever class you set there, you continue to use that throughout the application. All right. So user manager gives us access to a bunch or a suite of functions that allow us to manage sign in, retrieve user information, add users. So we don't have to write any custom code to be adding, or I don't have to go and put in any unit of work functions for user table interaction or role table interaction. All of those things come out of the box with the user manager, sign in manager, and you have another one called the roles manager. If we need to use it, then we will. But I'm just letting you know that most of those things are encapsulated in these services, which can easily be injected into our application. So now that we have set up our controller and injected all of what we need to start writing our endpoint. So our first endpoint is going to be for registration. So it's going to look something like this: public async task, I action result, and the name is register. For registration, since we'll be requiring potentially sensitive data, well, not potentially, we'll be requiring username, password, and so on. I don't want to send that across the pipe in the parameters. So we discussed that in the overview video where I was saying that using the parameter is quite fine when it's something like this, just an ID, nothing too damning, right? But then when you get to asking a user to register and submit sensitive information, you don't want to just start saying string email, string password, etc., because then everything will actually come across in plain text over to the endpoint. So what we want to do is make this one a post. So we have done work with the get verb. We haven't done much work or any work with the post. So a post is just like when you're submitting a form on the internet. When you click submit to go to, let's say, sign up for Facebook or sign up for something online, if you look in the URL up top, you don't see any of the information being listed out. You just know that your information left one page and supposedly went somewhere, and the other page could represent it. That's what a post operation is. Right? So the message is encapsulated and kind of hidden from prying eyes. When we do a get, it is sent across for in plain sight, just like what we saw here. So there's no reason to hide. So of course, when you're dealing with sensitive information, you don't want to use a get or anything that will not hide the information that's being sent across. So with that considered, the parameter that we're going to use here is going to be a custom one. So I'm going to put in an annotation to say get the information from body. So the sender needs to send it in the body as opposed to in the URL, in the body of the request. And then we can specify a data type that should take the information. So I'm going to say user DTO. So I haven't created user DTO as yet, but I'm just going to say user DTO. All right. So let us go ahead and create this user DTO. And then I'll explain why it can work like that. So in models, we click add class. We're calling user DTO. And then user DTO needs to have at minimum the same fields that we, one, need to map back to our API user, and two, we need the user to provide. So this is how I am designing my user DTO. So you can pause, replicate it, but I'm going to walk you through it anyway. So first name, last name. When registering, you have the option to pass those two fields over. Notice I said option because I'm setting neither as required. We have the phone number. So if you want, you can send us your phone number when you're registering for the API. Once again, not required. However, email is definitely required and password is definitely required. And then for email, we'll actually be using this as the username also. So if we have this DTO, as usual, we have to make sure that our mapper knows about the DTO. So mapper initializer, I'm just going to go ahead and say that API user and user DTO need to know about each other and reverse map. All right. And so that is what we will do. So the purpose of the from body here is to say that when a request hits this endpoint, you will look in the body of the request. Don't look in the URL. So one, I'm not requiring anything in the URL. And two, if the user passes anything in the URL, I don't care. I'm not looking for any information in the URL. However, the body of the request should contain information with fields that match up to the user DTO. So if they send more information than I need, it will be ignored. But at minimum, they must send these two for me to process it. So that's how everything kind of ties in when we talk about sanitizing the requests and making decisions based on what is coming across the pipe. All right. So let us go back to our account controller. And then what we want to do at this point, and we can do a number of things. So I'm going to firstly try and log and say registration attempt came in for, and this I copied and pasted that so I kind of preempted myself. But let's say registration attempt for user DTO dot email. All right. So whatever email came in over the user DTO, that's what I'm putting there. So I'm going to also check if the valid state, if it is in a valid state. So I can say if model state. So this is how we verify forms, right? If you have done MVC and this is you're just learning API, it's pretty much the same process. We're going to say if model state is valid, right? So at this point, I would probably say if it is not valid, then I'm going to return a bad request. So that means you sent over a request to register, but your validation failed. So you didn't include the email, you didn't include, or you didn't meet whatever standards I would have laid out for you regarding the data you should have sent, right? And then I can return the model state so that it will kind of inform the sender what went wrong, all right? So if model state is not valid, then we do that. Otherwise, we can proceed to try. So just try tab, and I'll catch that exception. So let me just deal with the exception part of it where I'm going to say log error, something went wrong in that register section. And then in previous times, what did we do? We returned with the status code 500. So another type of return that you can do when there was a problem is literally return problem. And you would put in the same kind of message. So I could put in something went wrong. right? And then tell it that it has a status code of 500. So I'm just showing you that there are different ways. If you are looking at other resources, you may see me do it this way and somebody else returning a problem, somebody else returning the status code manually. There are different ways to do this, all right? But then for the ones that are built in and they already give you the methods, I generally encourage you to just use those. So we've taken care of the bad situations. I like to just say, if it is not right, do this. Now, what do I do when it is right? One, I can say var user is equal to mapper dot map into API user, and then I am mapping user DTO. So then it will say, okay, match all the fields, which we know already. We know how the mapper works by now. And then now that I have the user, I can say var result is equal to, and I'm going to await a call to my user manager dot, and then here's a bunch of functions. Like I said, we can do a number of things. So I can say create async. So user manager create async, and then I'll just pass in the user object. All right, so go ahead and create that user. It will automatically take the password, hash it, store it, do everything it needs to do. We didn't have to write any complex logic to really facilitate that, right? But then sometimes things fail. So I'm going to say if not result dot succeeded, right? So it will tell you, did it succeed or not? Then I'm going to also return a bad request. So, I'm going to say something went wrong this time. It's not a model state thing. It's probably just an error. So the thing is that the result object actually gives you the errors. If you really need to list them out, you can probably put them in a loop, list them, put them in one string, and return them if you want to give the user that much detail. But sometimes those details can be too sensitive, so you have to be careful what information you're sending back to the calling client, right? So at this point, I'm just going to say bad request. It was a 400, and it is because the user registration failed. That's all you need to know. So try again later, because this could have been my fault. Otherwise, if it was something serious, we would have given them a 500 to know it is on our side that the problem is. And if it is that you sent incorrect data, then I'm telling you what is incorrect, because the model state will list that out. All right. And that's pretty much it for the register. Now, since we've done the register, I think we might as well just do the login, because the only real way to test the register is to test the login, right? So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this code right below. But what we need to do is change the action name. So this is a login action. We're using the same user DTO. We're taking from the same URL, from the same body, ignoring anything coming in the URL. And then what we're going to do is say login, attempt for this user. If it is invalid, once again, validation constraints, email, password. Now, one thing that we may want to consider is, do we need the same DTO, or should we use the same DTO for login and register? Same principle with the other DTOs, right? Because for login, I don't need your first name, last name, phone number. I only want your email and password. So what I'll do here is quickly just do a class to say login DTO. And I'm going to take these two fields, put in just the login, because it's absolutely necessary for login stuff, but then I'll let this inherit from login. So the fields are shared across the board regardless. All right, so I should call that login user DTO. There we go. Let my mapper know that it is. Do I even need to let the mapper know? I really don't need to let the mapper know about this one, because the operation is going to be slightly different. So I'll leave user DTO in the mapper, but I won't put this one, and I'll explain why. So login user DTO. So once again, this is another part of security when we sanitize exactly what we want, because if the user may have included the client, or well, the user sending the request, the client sending the request could have included malicious information in the body of the request. By doing this part here, I am saying that I am only looking for fields that match what I have outlined in this DTO. So if they send more information than I need, it's going to be ignored regardless. So that's another part of the security considerations when creating APIs. So we get the login user DTO, and then for the login, okay, well, we validate it. Okay, good. So we check the model state, and then what I'm going to try. So nothing much has to change here except maybe the log messages, just to make sure that we are accurately representing where what went wrongly. All right. So under the try, what we're going to do, I don't need to do any mapping. So let me just remove what's in try and start from scratch. I am going to say var result is equal to, and then this is where we use the sign-in manager dot password sign-in async. So you see that? And you can even do a check. You can check to see if the password would be correct if the person was trying to sign in. Of course, that doesn't help the situation at this point because we want to actually sign in, right? So sign in async takes two overloads. We can pass in the whole user object. I just took out the mapping and the password, or we can choose to just put in the username and the password, which is the one I'm going to use. So you see I have both options. So if we kept the mapping, we would pass in the whole user object as well as the password. In this case, I took it out. So I'll just say user DTO dot, and we're using the email address as the username, and user DTO dot password. And then is persistent. So let's read what is persistent says. It says flag indicating whether the sign-in cookie should persist after the browser is closed. Now, this is an API. I don't know what kind of application is calling the API. It could be Postman. It could be the browser. It could be a mobile app. I don't need to persist anything, so I'm going to say false. All right. And then the last one, lock on failure. I don't want to lock anybody when they fail to log in. That would be too much of an administrative overhead. Once again, context is everything. But this is what our sign-in code looks like. Now, the result is going to be a similar object to the register attempt. So we can just say if not result dot successful. This is asynchronous. So when we fail to put on the await, then the result that we're going to get is of type task, not of the type that we are expecting. So let me make sure I put on the await. And then when I do that, you'll see that the IntelliSense is now giving me what I would expect. So if it is not successful, let me just double check what we did when it wasn't successful here. Then we say bad request up top. But if it's an unsuccessful login attempt, it's not necessarily a bad response. What I would just say, or bad request rather, what I would say is unauthorized, right? Which is a 401 if I'm not mistaken, right? Unauthorized, and I can probably just return the user DTO to say, this is what you attempted to use. It's unauthorized. I'm sorry. All right. Otherwise, if it gets this far, that means everything is okay. So we'll just return. I could return okay. I've used accepted in the past, right? So anything with a 200 in the 200 range would be seen as an okay response. So okay is 200. You have created, which is I think 204. You have accepted, which is 202, etc. You don't have to worry about memorizing these codes necessarily. Just know that in particular situations you want to use this one and not the other, right? So then that is what our login function will look like. And okay, I thought I'd made a change just now. All right. So The register is saying that not all code paths return a value. Oh, that is why I'm so sorry. I missed this one out. So remember that you always have to have a final return. So the same way that we said the if statement does this, but we return accepted afterwards, I have to do that here. So I could return accepted up top here also, right? I have accepted your registration attempt, and then that is done. Now, before we move on to testing, I want to bring something very important to your attention, and that is the routing considerations for this endpoint. We already established that the root would be API slash controller, in this case, API slash account. In previous times, let's say the hotel controller, we would have determined that we can't have two identical get operations. The name of the action is irrelevant, but I can't have two operations having identical verbs. The verb can be the same, but then there must be some nuance to one implementation of the verb from the other. In this situation, I have both as post. Both of them are post. Once again, the name here doesn't matter, but they're both post, which means that if I attempt to do any post operation, it's going to not know which one to use. They're both kind of identical in terms of what they're expecting. The only way I can really differentiate between these two is to give them their own roots, right? So I can say the root for register is register, right? And then the root for login is login. So that way, at this point, the only way to hit register is to say server slash API slash account slash register as a post request. The only way to hit login is to say whatever slash API slash account slash login. So I'm specifying that the root for this endpoint is login and this one is register. That way they can have identical verbs, but because there are different locations, they won't interfere with each other. All right, so let's take this for a spin. Let's try and register a user real quick. So when we check out what Swagger has generated for us, you notice it doesn't append anything to it, like how for ID here and ID there. They are now post, not get, right? And then if I expand, they will show me what the object needs to look like or can look like when it is coming across the pipe. All right, just the same for login. So you see the difference. Remember that we have two different DTOs. This one has email, password, and the custom fields. This one only takes email and password. So that's what I was saying, that when in a situation when you don't need all the information, you create a DTO to limit exactly what you need in that situation. All right, so let us try with the registration attempt. So I'm going to leave that email. I'm going to put in some password that has characters and a number, and I'm going to leave everything else blank because all I really need are email and password. However, by leaving these as they are, they're literally going to go over as string, and phone number. So let's see what happens when we click execute. All right, and this attempt is giving me a 500 error. So this would have been one of those exceptions caught, and it's saying it cannot resolve a particular service for the sign-in manager. All right, so the sign-in manager is giving a problem, and I would like to sit down and troubleshoot it, but when I'm thinking about it, I really don't need the sign-in manager for this API, and I'm going to explain. So when I put in sign-in manager and injected it and all these things, it was because that's like a knee-jerk reaction whenever we have authentication to do. We want all the libraries that can help with authentication, right? However, in the case of a web application where somebody would submit a login attempt through a form, click submit, and then be told they are logged in through some message or some indication that says hello username, that is really the sign-in manager creating something like a session or a cookie based on the configuration set up for managing that user session. In terms of an API, we're not going to be maintaining a session for any user. Yes, you register, but we don't know when you're going to be calling the API, how long, and it's not like you're going to be lingering inside the API for one or a few calls. The API is going to accept your request, give you a response, and be finished. That is why we're using tokens. So I don't want to get too much ahead of myself and start discussing tokens. But because of the tokens, we really don't need the sign-in manager in the traditional sense of what the sign-in manager does. So I'm going to remove all references to the sign-in manager really. And I'm going to comment out the login endpoint for now. So that's Control KC just to comment, right? I really don't need all of this just yet. So we'll get there, but I just got ahead of myself and I apologize. Sometimes these things happen, but hey, we're just going to comment out the code and then we'll revisit it later on. Now, as it relates to some of the error messages that we want to send back, what I'm going to do here is kind of add all the result errors. So I did say you could find a way to put the result errors in a package and send off. So I'm going to say for each error in result.errors, I did say it could be sensitive information. So I'm accepting that risk, but I'm going to say model state dot, and I can say add model error, which is then going to ask me for a key. I don't have to put in the key. And then I'm going to say error error being the error message coming back from the result attempt, code. So, all right, here's what I'll do. I'll put the code as the key, right? So the key there really means what's the name of the error. And then the code error dot description would be right there, all right? And then we can say bad request, user attempt, failed, or I'll just set the model state because it's already obvious that it failed. So that's how we'll proceed with the error messages for our registration attempt. So let us try this one more time. All right, so we're back in Swagger without the login endpoint, but we're going to just try it out. I'll put in my complicated password once again and then execute. All right, and this looks a bit better. All right, so firstly, we're not getting any complaints about any user manager or any service not being registered. That's one. Two, we're seeing here that we're getting back a 400 and we're getting back some details as to what is wrong. So invalid username blank blank is invalid and can only contain letters or digits. All right, so that is because we did a mapping, but we're only asking for email. The actual identity user has to have a username value also. So what I need to do here is to specify that user.username is equal to the email address. So email address is a required field, username is a required field, and password. They're all required fields by the identity user. So I was only providing email and password. I'm just going to go ahead and provide the username also, but it's the same as the email address. All right, so let's just try that one more time. All right, and when I do that and I put in the same details, user at example and password 1, look at what we get. We get our 200 response. All right, and well, it's just telling us everything is good to go. So it has not failed. There's no validation error or anything like that. I noticed that it says undocumented for the 202. That's because we didn't let the controller know or let Swagger know that 202 is a potential return type. So remember that we did that with the other controllers where we listed out the potential return types. So you can go ahead and replicate that in the account controller. But for now, we've set up our registration process. I know you might be disappointed that you're not getting to test the login one just yet, but it's really not a login. It's going to be more like a an authorization to say, okay, you have a token and it's valid. Yes, you can access the resource you want. Because once again, a login really is to create a session and allow somebody access to your system for a period. Whereas with an API, we don't know what period you may need access for. We don't need to facilitate you for a longer period than it takes to process your request and give you your response. So we just want to know that you are an acceptable accessor, validate that, give you what you want, and then we're done with you. So that is why we'll be doing the tokens. So when we get there, we will go ahead and hash out more how we restrict access.